Thank you very much, Sharon, and thank you to the Treespotters of the Holliston Garden Club for inviting me to do this talk. I'm excited to talk about trees. This is, well, start with my little slides. Oh, this, by the way, I'm going to tell you that some of the pictures in here are ones that I have taken, and some I have borrowed from other people. This actually is a gorgeous American elm that is in Mount Auburn Cemetery that I had the pleasure of seeing. Elms are actually not one of the trees I'm going to talk about today because most of the ones that you're going to see are ones like this that have nice little labels on them already, so you don't need to figure out how to identify it because, as we know, unfortunately the elms, a lot of the native elms that are in the wild they don't get too big and there aren't too many of them around anymore because of the Dutch elm disease. But that's I don't know why it's saying that. Okay, so it's Arbor Day weekend. If you didn't already know that, yesterday there was a tree planting to celebrate the 300 years of Holliston's history, and yesterday was actually Arbor Day, but a lot of people celebrate it the whole weekend, and we are indeed doing that. So why should we celebrate trees? There are so many reasons. And I did want to tell you that there's some words on these first few slides, but for the rest of it, it's mostly going to be pictures. So don't worry. So I borrowed this from actually a Tree Lafayette, which is in Indiana, but it is so perfect. It applies everywhere. There are so many benefits of trees. I'm not going to read every one of those, but I thought it was a really good way to capture some of the information. The next slide has it in a little bit more dramatic fashion. So, and I will actually read this. If only we had something that slowed floodwaters, prevented soil erosion, absorbed carbon dioxide, produced oxygen, provided habitat and nourishment to wild animals, and made the world a beautiful place. There you go. That's why you should care about trees. So in New England, we are lucky to live in a place that trees are, if you leave land alone that has been disturbed in some way, it's going to turn back into forest. And it's the natural habitat of most of New England. So what we're going to do today is start to get to know a few of those trees. I'm not going to try to cover everything. It would be a little much, but I'm going to try to talk about the ways that we categorize trees and the ways that we divide them into groups and ways that you can look at trees and try to figure them out if you don't know what it is. So I wanted to mention that feel free to ask questions along the way. I don't mind that being interrupted for that because sometimes it's easier to ask them at the time rather than kind of go back to, oh, what were we talking about then? But we'll leave a little time for questions if there are any at the end as well. So I thought it would be a great idea to start, like I was saying, we divide things in different ways. And one of the ways we divide trees is evergreen and deciduous. And evergreens, a lot of them are, most of the ones that have kind of broad leaves like a rhododendron or something like that are shrubs. Most of the trees that are evergreens either have needles or scales. And we'll talk a little bit more about them in regard to specific trees. Right now, I thought evergreens was a great thing to start with because this is a time of year that they're easy to find. They stick out. So we'll start with pines. We have 3 common pines in this area. One is, and I'm going to tell you that I won't necessarily say that word, but I did put the scientific names of all the trees in because that's the way I am. A lot of trees, the common names are pretty, there aren't usually a lot of different common names for the same tree. For a lot of plants there are, so scientific names are always helpful. And pines, it's pinus, which is kind of cool. So we have the eastern white pine, the red pine, and the pitch pine are the most common ones. So you can see that these are needle leaf trees. And the pines have their needles in, we call it bundles. So you can see how they're attached to the branch in little groups, a little bundle. White pines have bundles of 5. Red pines have bundles of 2, and pitch pines have bundles of 3. The pitch pine is also a little kind of twisty. If you actually look up close, the needle is a little bit twisty, so that's another sign. You can also see that the pitch pine twig is a little stouter, a little sturdier. So.
I have a question.
Sure.
I'm not familiar with red pines or pitch pines around this area. Could you tell us where these particular trees mostly are located in New England?
Absolutely. I'm going to go the next slide eastern white pine. Actually, I'll wait a couple of slides before I answer that question because it might be a little easier. The bark is also pretty distinctive. Eastern white pine, I'm going to have to tell you, is extremely variable depending on the age. This is a mature one. I wouldn't use bark as a way to try to distinguish it, but red pine and pitch pine are really quite distinctive. The pitch pine has this chunky, beautiful, I just think it's gorgeous bark. Red pine has a little bit of that kind of red and gray color to it. And red pine, one thing I can say about red pine is it also grows like really tall and straight. I'll show you some pictures of the whole tree in a minute. These are just the different cones that are on them. So you can see that if you find some cones on the ground, they're also pretty distinctively different. You can see the pitch pine has like this little kind of, almost like a little thorn sticking out of the scale. And the red pine's chunky, and then the eastern white pine, you've all seen those, I'm sure. Last year they were all over the place. I know you, Mary, were saying that. So these pictures were all actually taken here in Holliston. You see these everywhere. You know, these are the eastern white pines are the big trees that are sticking up out of the forest. They're in the older neighborhoods. They're everywhere. They have a kind of a little open appearance. They're very, if you get up close to them, they're really soft, and I think they're just gorgeous trees. They tend to lose their lower branches as they age because they're very sun-loving, and that's the case with most of the pines. So this was taken actually in my neighborhood here in Holliston. This was also taken in my neighborhood. Now, red pine is not, these were planted, you can tell that. Somebody made a poor decision many years ago to plant these tall, big trees close to a house. I would be a little scared having that close to my house, but you can see how tall and straight they grow. They're really pretty cool. Most of the red pines that you find in Massachusetts were planted either for ornamentally like that or in plantations. Red pine is more native farther north in New England. Pitch pine, however, you find it a lot on the Cape, and you find it here in Holliston. That was taken at the community farm over on Rogers Road. And it tends to be in a sandier, poorer soil. So that's why you find it on the Cape. So pitch pine is not, eastern white pine is by far the most common that you're going to see. The pitch pine, you can see it, there's a trail called the Pitch Pine Trail at Waseca Wildlife Sanctuary off of Mill Street. And they're also at Wennekening Woods. I've seen there's a little area that has a bunch of pitch pine, not too far from Mission Springs. So, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
So we're going to go on to some other trees that have needles but are not in bundles. They're attached to the twig in a just singly. This is not a native tree, Norway spruce, but it is so common that I figured I had to include it. This tree picture here was taken in my daughter's neighborhood in Drexel Hill, Pennsylvania, where I was visiting recently. And so you can see it gets pretty big. A long time ago, and it can get even bigger. A long time ago, when I was taking a class in New England botany, somebody described the Norway spruce branches as being, and I'm going to show you what I mean right here, looking like an Irish setter's tail. So you see how it curves up like that, and then it's got these branches hanging down just like an Irish setter. It's pretty cool. So it's very distinctive, and when you drive home, you're going to probably see them everywhere. A lot of people have planted them, and needless to say, and plant names with locations aren't always actually the case, but this would be found in Norway and other parts of Northern Europe. It's, as I said, single needles. You can see how that cone is different than the, even though it's long like the white pine, it's got finer, thinner scales. It also has a really pretty bark, kind of pink and gray, kind of chunky looking. So this is another evergreen that has needles that are attached singly to the branches. This is actually the underneath of the branch, so you can see it's got kind of like this white stripe. That's the eastern hemlock. That's a surefire way to identify it if you're not sure. It's got kind of a soft appearance. Here's a nice tall tree. It's got a pretty different looking cones. That doesn't give you a real sense that they're not very big. I also included this picture here because unfortunately the hemlocks are prone to a disease called hemlock woolly adelgid. And this is how you know that you have it. You would find that this time of year. It's this cottony looking thing, which is a waxy material that's produced by this insect to protect it over the winter. And unfortunately, it will eventually kill trees, and it's more of really a problem farther south, but it's becoming more and more of a problem in this area. Yes?
When you hear about hemlock, like, about all these poisonings and things, is that a different plant?
That's a different plant, yes.
Somehow I didn't connect it.
No, I wish I knew. It is not this hemlock at all. No. Okay. So now we're going to get into the scaly trees. There's two that you're commonly going to see. One is the eastern red cedar, and the other is, I hate to call it this, because this just doesn't sound good to me to say arborvitae, but that's how everybody says it. That does, however, that's a great name because it means tree of life. And it is actually a very, very long-lived tree in the wild and can get quite large as well. So not that many people plant eastern red cedar, but I think it's underrated, I guess is what I would say. Reason I took this particular picture on the right of the arborvitae is because it is something that is, it is actually native a little bit farther west and north of us here, and not so much around here, but it's planted very extensively. And there are lots and lots of cultivars Anybody know what cultivars are? Yeah, okay, yeah. Well, for those, if there's anybody that doesn't, it's just basically a plant has been bred for certain characteristics that people think would be useful in their gardens. And so arborvitae has cultivars up the wazoo. And some of them are these tall, straight ones, and some are much more full, some are dwarf. There's a lot of different ones, and it can be really nice in the garden. I don't think that's the way you want to use it. And to me, it's aesthetically not so great, but they make fantastic hedges, and you know, like that tall, thin look is a little. I think it would be better if there's a bunch of them. Yes.
So I want to hear how you're supposed to pronounce it.
Well, that is how it's pronounced, arborvitae.
You said you didn't like
I just don't like the way that sounds. It seems to me like it should be like arborvitae or something like that, but it's not. It was just a silly comment. So they both have this kind of flaky, vertically scaly bark that can sometimes be a little bit reddish. In case I probably didn't really explain yet what I meant by scaly leaves. So the leaves actually are overlapping like a fish's scales. The arborvitae, you can see it's got kind of a flat look to it. The cedar is more, you know, it grows all the way around the branch and a little bit more like sharp looking. It actually sometimes can have on the same tree some leaves that are growing more like needles and some that are scaly. It has an amazing amount of wildlife value. They look like berries, don't they? Those are actually cones. I mean, it's just a weird way that they grow, but those are the cones of the eastern red cedar, and this was actually taken in my neighborhood last year, and it was later on in the year I saw when some of the birds were migrating. There's a bird, if you're, my mind is just, cedar waxwing. They love fruit and berries and things. They were all over these things, you know, just flying around, just grabbing them all. So it is a really good plant for wildlife value, and I think they're actually can be quite attractive in a landscape. But not too many people plant them, but you'll find them a lot in old fields that are abandoned and edges, woodland edges, things like that. Yes?
I'm sorry I'm asking so many
No,
questions,
feel free.
I'm a curious person. So you haven't spoken about like the cultivation of these evergreens. Do they all require full sun, or do some of them do well? I know white pines grow just about anywhere, but the cedars I'm wondering about.
Actually, white pines will grow, you might think that they grow anywhere, but they actually really, when they're young, or actually all their lives, they require full sun. So when you see them in the middle of a forest, you know that there was either it was a abandoned field at one time, and they're one of the species that will come in at the beginning when a field is abandoned. These evergreens all like sun. Oh, oops, excuse me. Backtrack. Hemlock is the exception. Hemlock is actually grows quite, is fine in shade. In fact, in the forest, you're going to often find it in shade, and so it will retain its leaves all the way down, or its branches all the way down to the ground, because they don't mind the shade.
That's like called the lower canopy. Is that what they call that?
Yeah. So. All right, so now we're going to go into the broadleaf trees, or the deciduous trees, not all of which, but most of which are broadleaf. So the way that I approach identifying them this is where I start. The branching and the leaves are either opposite each other, you can see on the picture there, or alternate. So they, alternate where they are on the branch. So you can, if it's opposite, you're in luck because it's a really small group of trees. And I've included a couple here that are not necessarily native to Massachusetts, but you see them a lot. So the way to remember this that I learned is mad dogs, cats, and horses. So it's maple, ash, dogwood, catalpa, which is really more of a Midwestern plant, but planted a lot, and horse chestnut, which is not native, is native to Europe, but also planted a lot, or used to be. And alternate is everything else. So we'll start with the opposites. These are the maples you're likely to find around Holliston. So this brings in another way to categorize plants or trees. Is the broadleaf trees is the type of leaf. Maples are and oaks are very recognizable because they have something called lobes. So, it goes in and out. So this is the lobe, and this in between here is called the sinus. So red maples are the only ones you're going to find that have a V-shaped sinus. The sugar, Norway, and silver maple all have a U-shaped sinus. So that's one way you can start to, categorize. But you notice that the sugar maple and Norway maple are pretty similar. So, and a lot of people get confused about that. Unfortunately, around here, you're probably going to see more Norway maples, which are not sold anymore. They are considered invasive, but downtown Holliston and some of the areas that are like in between houses, you're going to see a lot of them because they planted themselves. They don't have a lot of wildlife value compared to the native maples, and they can turn into monocultures in some areas, and that's why they're considered invasive. But one way to look at it is, I don't know if you can see this in this picture, but the Norway maple tends to be a little like wider rather than taller compared to the sugar maple. If you do actually have leaves on it, a surefire way is to take off one of the leaves, break it open, or break open the stem, and you're going to see a white sap. That is, if you see that, you know it's a Norway maple. Sugar maple is not going to be that way. Yep.
Are the rest of the maples native?
Yes, the red maple, sugar maple, and silver maple are all native. Silver maple, I showed the back of the leaf as well, so you can see why it's called silver maple. You can see how those lobes or those sinuses are really very deep, and the lobes are a little thinner, so it's pretty distinctive. We actually have those are typically growing in floodplains, but we have in Mudville some examples of some really fantastic silver maples, huge silver maples, and in fact, Sharon, you submitted one, I believe, to the state's Legacy Tree program, and it was accepted. Is that right?
Well, it's being considered.
Being considered.
They did come out and they did measure it, and I haven't heard yet.
So there's at least one, maybe a couple along School Street downtown, and a lot of the backyards in Mudville. That's the fact that they're so big is kind of distinctive.
This one was 16 feet around. That's pretty massive.
Yeah.
So if it gets accepted, does that mean it's protected?
Does it give it any? Yes. Okay.
Because that's, the big thing is we keep it.
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to do.
Yeah. So with maples, I've primarily concentrated on the leaves because they're easy to, the leaves are so distinguishable, and it's also a way to tell one maple from another. But I did want to concentrate or spend a little bit of time talking about the red maple because it's just one of my favorites. Red maple is also sometimes called swamp maple. And you can see that little red sort of haze to these trees there. Those are all red maples. I think it was last May. And the red haze is from the fruit. This right here. The little whirlybirds. It's there's something red in red maples like all the time. They got a lot of times they have red stems. They have some pretty red color. So there's the fall color behind my house of red maples. And maples have, all maples have this, but red maples flower quite early. The fruit is already developing on them. So if you've got any red maples around in the neighborhood, take a look. You'll see that they've got some fruit developing on them, but not all of them, because red maples have two different kinds of flowers. These are the male flowers. Oops, excuse me, try that again. These are the female flowers, and these are the male flowers. You see all these little stamens with the pollen at the tips. So these are the ones that if they get pollinated and fertilized are going to turn into the fruit. So they have these two different kinds. It's too late in the season now to look for it, but next year, please do. And it can be as early as, they'll be in March. They'll be flowering. So one of our earliest flowering trees. And I don't know, everything about red maples I love. All right, so we're going to go on to the ash. Ash brings another kind of leaf. It's called a compound leaf. So this here, that's one leaf. All these are little leaflets. So it's attached, there's the attachment to the stem is right here. These are attached, if you look at the leaf, they have a different kind of attachment to it. So we call those leaflets, and you can see how it has that opposite branching. Has a pretty stout and distinctive bud. I'm not showing buds of all the trees, but this one is so distinctive I thought it was kind of cool to look at. It also has a fairly distinctive bark. To me, it kind of looks, it's sort of like little diamonds or crisscross, maybe kind of like a cantaloupe skin or something like that. Once you sort of start to recognize that, you can really notice it when you look at a ash tree. Unfortunately, we're talking about the baseball bats. They are actually moving more towards maple now, I guess. And it was actually, I think, maybe even before this started happening, but there is an invasive insect, that little green thing on the penny there, called an emerald ash borer, that is really decimating our ash populations. There is some hope from a parasitic wasp that's been released, and that eventually this might come under control. The emerald ash borer doesn't really kill the young trees, so the young trees that are out there hopefully will eventually grow back up if this wasp gets things under control. But right now they're in trouble. And these little D-shaped holes, you can see from very tiny, are the exit holes. So what this insect does is lays its eggs under the bark, and then the bark, the larvae tunnel like this. This I actually took on Gorwin Drive. There was a big ash tree that had died and the bark was off. And so basically all these little tunnels girdle the tree. The tree, the sap and water and everything up and down the tree, it's only just like right underneath the bark. There's a very thin layer where that happens. And if you interrupt that all the way around the tree's going to die. So that's how it kills it. So a sad story, but I'm hoping this one's going to have a eventually good ending. And here is the flowering dogwood, which used to be a lot more common, and people, I don't know, I'm trying to think, maybe about 30 years ago or so, there started to be a real serious problem with a fungus called anthracnose, and a lot of them were dying, and people started to plant Kusa dogwoods, which are Asian, instead. But there are cultivars that are resistant to the anthracnose, and it doesn't seem to be as much of an issue anymore. This is actually in my own house. It's bigger now. That was taken, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, maybe more than that. Dogwoods have a little sort of a soft spot in my heart because in the house that my kids grew up in Holliston, not this house, a different one, we had a pink flowering dogwood in the front yard, and they hung ornaments on it, they climbed it, they put blankets over it to make little tents and everything. They loved that tree, and when we moved, they said we had to plant one at our new house. So that's the tree. And my youngest daughter, the one who lives in Pennsylvania, and is now a mother herself, she a couple of years ago planted a dogwood in her own house. So it's definitely something that I love. This is a very distinctive winter flower bud, kind of onion shaped. These are something that a lot of people don't notice, which is the fruit. And this is the white native dot. This is actually, not sure really if it's a cultivar or a natural variation of the white one, but it has, this is actually the actual flower right in the center there. In this picture, you'd have to come up a little closer, but you can actually see the little stamens with the pollen and stuff. This area around here, those are called bracts, B-R-A-C-T-S. So there's something that in most flowers, it's just this little green thing that's underneath that you don't really even notice. But in dogwoods, they're the showy part. And it also has kind of a cool, chunky bark. So I like dogwoods. I gotta move on a little faster here. The catalpa is, as I said, is more native in the Midwest. It does, however, have and I understand, this is a story, maybe somebody here who's lived here a long time knows more about it, but that I heard I think it was in the 60s, that their kids got catalpa seedlings to take home from school for perfect attendance awards or something like that. Yeah. And so that's why you see a bunch of them around town. A lot of people consider them kind of messy trees because of those lovely fruit that drop all over your yard. But they actually, if you get close up, they have gorgeous flowers and really cool kind of heart-shaped leaves. So I think they're kind of interesting trees. And again, they are mostly opposite, although sometimes you get like 3 or 4 opposite each other instead of just 2. And then finally, the opposite side is the horse chestnut. And I included that because it's got these gorgeous flower spikes, and it also has a compound leaf. But instead of, remember in the ash how they were like, there was one stem and the leaflets were opposite mostly? Here it's a palm-shaped, so we call it palmate. So that's another way that you sometimes find compound leaves. But this is one leaf. And it's called horse chestnut because the fruit is very much like the American chestnut.
Squirrels love it.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. I have one squirrel that poured into the roof of our porch and filled it.
Oh no. Uh-oh. What happened? You know, I'm guessing that probably something about that picture it doesn't like, which is unfortunate. So there are two groups. So we're going on to the, I got a little distracted by that. We're going on to the alternate groups of leaves and branches. So the oaks, there are two general groups to divide them into, the red oak group and the white oak group. And that picture was showing what the difference is. But I can explain it, and you'll see it more in some other pictures. The red oak group, it has, everybody recognizes a oak leaf. It's just kind of one that you learn when you're young, and it's very distinctive. It also has lobes, just like the maple, but you know, it's got a longer lobe, longer type of leaf as opposed to more of a rounder. The red oak group has pointy lobes, and the white oak group has rounded lobes. And we'll see that in some of the other pictures. I was hoping that wasn't going to happen to all of them. Yeah, it must have been the picture that did not, we had to translate my PowerPoint to Google Drive, and it apparently didn't like that particular picture. So these are the oaks that we'll find here in New England that are in the red oak group. The northern red oak, scarlet oak, black oak, and pin oak. So the black oak, so I happen to have 3 large oak trees in the woods behind my house, and they're tall, so I can't get super close to the buds and things like that, but I've looked at them through binoculars, and I've looked at the bark, and after a period of time, I decided that one was a white oak, one was a northern red oak, and the other was a black oak. And the thing about the black oak that is very distinctive is this really nice shininess to the leaves. Scarlet oak and red oak, I mean, you look at those and I think you'd be hard pressed just from the leaf to tell the difference, but the shininess of the black oak is helpful. The pin oak is quite a bit different. Now that is actually not native to New England. It's little other parts of the United States, but it's frequently planted, so I thought it was worth including. You can see how that has like more deep sinuses. Remember that word, sinuses, that we were talking about before? Deep sinuses and thinner lobes. So that one is a little easier to tell. I'm going to be very honest in that just identifying that it's in the red oak group is probably going to be good enough, because they are really hard to tell apart. You have to look really closely at their winter buds, at their acorns, and you can't always see those things. And here's the thing that makes it even more complicated. They naturally hybridize. So red oak group. And off. Yeah, no, not oak, red oak. Just as long as you know that it's not a white oak and it's a red oak, because those pointy lobes are the key. The bark can vary a lot, that it tends to have these vertical grooves, which is, as you're going to see, is a lot different from the white oak. So here's the white oak group. We have one that's just called white oak. We have the swamp white oak, and the chestnut oak. Now, again, you know, the swamp white oak and chestnut oak, I think you have a little bit of a hard time distinguishing them. They both have the, you know, very shallow sinuses as opposed to the white oak. So that's one thing, but you can see they're all rounded. The way that you're most likely to distinguish between a swamp white oak and a chestnut oak is where it's growing. The swamp white oak, as you might expect, grows in floodplains, kind of wettish areas. The chestnut oak would be, if you find it in a dry upland, it's probably chestnut oak. So, and I didn't talk about the American chestnut in this, and I didn't get into do a slide on that, but American chestnut has a leaf that is fairly similar to this, except it's got points. Actually, something called teeth, which we'll get into in a little bit. Oh, almost forgot. White oak is also, I don't know from a picture, sometimes it's hard to distinguish that, but it's got this kind of like chunky bark, like small chunks, very light, kind of looking like they're about to fall off the tree. Once you know it, you're going to see white oaks from like a block away. They're very distinctive bark. All right, so birches. I actually had to do 2 slides for birches because we have more birches than a lot of people know about. So this slide is the ones that have the peely bark. And unlike the peely bark of my mind is just arborvitae and red cedar, this peeling is horizontal. The other one was vertical. So paper birch is probably the most easy to pick out. Everybody knows that. It's the one they used to make canoes out of and everything. It peels off like you could write on it. Sometimes, and it's mostly bigger kind of chunky peels. Yellow birch is a little bit less recognizable to people, but we do see it a lot. And it has a little bit of a maybe thinner peel to it, but it does have kind of a golden color. It's golden or maybe bronze. I don't know. It's quite a beautiful tree. The river birch is very commonly planted. It is, as you can imagine, it's something that normally grows along floodplains as well, and it's got this beautiful peeling, sort of multicolored bark, kind of a reddish color to it. And I understand that what you find in nurseries is called a heritage river birch, and it's actually a cultivar that, you know, in order to propagate it, it's basically a clone of the same thing. So all the river birches you see that say heritage river birch, you know, they're clones, they're all related, they're all the same clone. And that, you know, so there's not this genetic diversity that, so if something comes and hits birches in the future, or that birch, they're not going to have the natural ability to, you know, to maybe fight, to have different ones that might survive. Yes?
Why do they peel like that?
Why do they peel like that? I don't know the answer to that. That's just.
I mean, it's just sort of.
It is a cool. It's a very cool thing, and why? I don't know.
You think like, is that tree okay?
What is the advantage? That's a good question. I am not sure. Yes.
I understand there's a miniature river birch,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of people are planting them because the standard river birch
Gets quite
so
large. Yes.
tall.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm wondering if the miniature also just gets tall but slower, as some
Yeah.
miniature plants do.
Yeah, probably. I'm not familiar with that, so I don't know the answer to that. But yeah, but anyway, these are the 3 birches. Birches, I'm going to show you the leaves, but bark is the best way to distinguish birches because it's so distinctive, especially the peely ones. These are the other 2 birches that people are not quite as familiar with. One is the gray birch, and the other is the black birch, sometimes called sweet birch. The gray birch you often find in like woodland, like if at the edge of a woods, where there's a clearing or something that has just gone. They're one of the early pioneer trees in an area. They, as a very young, it's got this kind of slightly reddish look to it. But when it gets older, it's quite different. It's white. It's a white, but you can tell the difference between that and a paper birch because it doesn't have the peely bark. It still has that kind of reddish color at the on the younger branches, and then there's this little sort of upside down V thing where the branches come off. I also wanted to mention these little slashes that you're seeing here, which is another way to distinguish certain types of trees. Those are called lenticels, and they are actually a place where oxygen can get into the growing bark of the tree. And birches, it's not as obvious in the peely ones because of the fact that there's all these peels and everything, but they also have the lenticels. And so black birch has them as well. And when it's younger, but they're not white, they're kind of the same color as the rest of the bark. It's kind of a light gray when it's younger, and then when it gets older, it starts to like peel off, almost peel in a different way than the others. This is not something that's going to come off. It just starts growing, peeling off, but it stays on there. I'm not sure if I described that very well, but black birch is actually pretty common in the woods here, and when it also sometimes is prone to some kind of a canker. I forget what causes it now, but sometimes you'll see these big holes in them, and they still grow. They still continue to grow.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
What did you say the name of those little oxygen?
Oh, sure. It's lenticel, Lenticel.
Thank you very much.
No problem. So I did show the birch leaves because they give me the opportunity to talk about another thing that you can use in identifying trees, and it's teeth. So that's what we call these little things on the edge of the leaf. So all the birch leaves have teeth. The river birch actually has kind of like double teeth. The paper yellow and black all have that kind of oval shape with a little point at the end. So leaves would be a hard way to tell the three of them apart, but fortunately their bark is very different. But it's very common on the cherry leaves to see that, and if you turn it over and see that, you know it's a cherry, not a birch.
Are those thorns? They look like thorns.
Where?
Just fuzz and they look sharp.
No, it's soft. It's not. It's the fruit. These are the flowers, sort of little clusters of flowers, and there's the fruit. I don't know. I think it's probably fairly sour, but this is a native tree that can get quite big.
I forget what you call the ribbon in the area where you said the orange fuzz is. What do you call that?
The midrib of the, there is a name for that, and it's just escaping me. I'm sorry. I would say along the mid-vein, yeah. So next we'll talk about the American beech, which is again a tree that is very distinguishable by its bark. Even as a big mature tree, it has this gorgeous light gray smooth bark, which unfortunately, of course, is very irresistible to certain people that want to carve into it, which kills me when I see that. But typically it doesn't harm the tree, but it defaces it, and I hate to see that. This is I sometimes like to think of like a bigger tree, the base of it almost like an elephant's foot. It's kind of cool. This is a beech grove over in, I think it's in Dover, in a trustee's property in Dover. And the reason I included that is that beech trees actually, they'll send out shallow roots, and a lot of times new trees sprout up from those roots. So that grove, all those little smaller trees are most likely connected to some of the larger trees. They're actually one organism. Some other trees, aspens, do that kind of thing too. So I included this picture because beech trees are also, at least younger ones, are very easy to distinguish in the wintertime because they retain their leaves all winter long. And it's a kind of a very light tan color, which just kind of jumps out when there's not that much growth around. So they're really quite pretty, and they if it's windy, they kind of make noise. They rattle and make noise. This is a beech leaf. This in the growing season. It also has teeth, as you can see. I included this because they're another winter. I hadn't talked in a lot of these about winter characteristics, but more so in the beech because they're very distinctive. That is the bud, the leaf bud of a beech. There is no other tree that has a bud that looks anything like that. A little, cigar with overlapping scales, kind of chestnut colored. It's extremely distinctive. So that's another really good, during the wintertime, a good indicator of a beech tree. Good way to identify it. On the right, I have a couple of pictures of a disease that is a new one, which is extremely, it's a real problem with beech trees. It's called beech leaf disease, and this is how these are some of the ways that that you might see it. These kind of dark stripes, and then starts to die here, or sometimes it kind of curls up like that, and the leaves die. When they leaf out this spring is when you would see that. You'll see it right away when it leaves out, because the causate it affects them, as they're in bud. It's killing off a lot of beeches around the country, and it's only been known for, I'm trying to think of how many years, maybe about 12 years or something like that. Known in Massachusetts, not that long. It took them a long time to figure out what was causing it. It's a nematode, which is a roundworm. Really something unknown. They don't know how it's spread. They don't know how it's killing the trees. It's just, so it's a problem. So the reason I included this is it's still a new problem here. The state forest Department of Conservation and Recreation Forestry Department is trying to track the spread of it. So if you see anything like this, you can report it. I have a piece of paper over on the table there with my library of books that has the information on how to report it. So that's why I included it. I mean, if we can't, we have, beeches are wonderful trees, and I'm hoping that we can, they can come up with something to save them, but in the meantime, you need to know the enemy, and knowing is part of it, is knowing where they are. So, yes?
Do you think it's possible, you say it's only the last 12 years or so, that this is a global warming related?
I don't really know. They're still studying.
And whatever is killing them is something that wasn't around until the climate has changed.
Yeah, it's possible, but it's a new thing, and they're still studying what's going. I mean, it's a real, like I said, they don't even know how it's spread. They don't know how it's killing the trees. So I can't answer that question, but a lot of things are affected by that. Yes?
I happened to be talking to one of Ralph Briggs's workmen, and he says if you notice it, not only report it, but have it treated. There is something that you can apply, and the sooner you do it this spring, the better.
Yeah, obviously in the forest, we're not going to be able to do that, but if you have individual trees, certainly. So next trees I was going to talk about are the poplars. The ones you're most likely to see are eastern cottonwood, big-tooth aspen, and quaking aspen. You can see they all have, kind of rounded teeth. Some similarity to the leaves. The cottonwood has more of a, it's more flattened on the base here, and the aspen is a smaller leaf than the big tooth. This one's called big tooth because the teeth are a little larger. The main way to tell that you're looking at a poplar is at the base of the stem right here, right now, the leaf, this is called the petiole, but we'll just call it a stem because you don't have to use technical terms. Anyway, the base right here is flattened perpendicular to the leaf. So in other words, here's your leaf and the stem is flattened that way, just at the base. But that is very distinctive, and that's actually, they call that one quaking aspen, but they all quake. And that's because of that. They've got that, that flat attachment, so in the wind they all kind of flutter around. It's pretty cool.
Can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
Sort of a general question. Do they know why there's so many different types of leaves? You think about, there's like, I don't even know how many.
It's a great question. That's a great question, but I don't know the answer to it. It is cool that they've developed all these different ways to grow. I don't know, but it's a good question. The poplar bark, when it's young, looks kind of like a birch. So, but as you saw in the previous slide, the leaves are quite a bit different. When it gets a cottonwood, as it gets mature, that's really distinctive. It's like really chunky. And if I actually just recently saw a picture of one that had been cut down, and those chunks are like this thick. They're really cool. So that's that light color with these. I use the word chunky a lot, I'm sorry. But it's very distinctive. And then the other thing is that you have cottonwood or one of the poplars around because you see all of this stuff floating down. I have a cottonwood tree that's next to my house, and this is actually a picture that I took as I was walking down the driveway, and it's all this stuff, and I looked up at the tree and it's like, oh my gosh, it's these big clusters of, that is actually the fruit. So it floats down with its nice little, the fuzz is part of it that helps it to travel to other places to plant, but it's the way it disperses its fruit. But it's very, all the poplars have that kind of cottony thing, and that's obviously why it's called cottonwood. I had to talk about this one because even though its a common name is tulip poplar, this is one that has a lot of names. Tulip tree, tulip poplar. I looked at a list and I don't remember all the others, but it's actually not a poplar. It is in the magnolia family, which is kind of cool. I guess if you look at the flower, maybe that makes sense. This beauty is in downtown Holliston. So it's the only tulip poplar I know of around here, obviously planted at some point, right at the corner of Hollis Street and Washington Street. It's really cool. So they're called tulip trees or tulip poplars because of the flower is kind of tulip-like. It's really, and it's pretty good sized flower. It's really quite pretty. These are the dry fruit. And then can almost see a tulip shape in the leaf too. That's a very distinctive leaf. It has those 3 lobes with the flattened top on in the middle one. Pretty cool tree. That actually, I mentioned I was down in Pennsylvania. The woods there, they're all over the place. So, and they grow very tall and straight. So, yes.
There's actually one growing in my neighbor's yard.
Oh, yeah?
And it's in blossom now.
Oh, really?
It grows so tall that the blossoms are about 20 feet up in the air.
Yeah, yeah.
And you can see it from Hemlock Street because the houses are apart and you can just look up and it's right up the hill.
Cool. I'll have to check it out. So the next trees I'm going to talk about are the American sycamore and London plane tree. American sycamore is a native tree. This picture illustrates that it grows in its native habitat is in floodplains. It's got a leaf that looks a lot like a maple, but that bark is pretty distinctive. There aren't any maples that look like that. The fruit is over there on the right. have spent ridiculous amount of time trying to see if there was any really good way to distinguish whether I was looking at a London plane tree or an American sycamore when you come across one. And basically what I decided is that if you see it in a floodplain, it's an American sycamore because the London plane trees don't tend to spread. If you see it in a neighborhood or an urban setting, it's probably a London plane tree.
You're sure they're not the same tree?
No, so I'm going to tell you what, so I'm glad you said that because you see how it says Platanus x acerifolia? Acerifolia means that it's got a maple-like leaf, which acer is the genus for maples, which it does have. That is actually a cross between the American sycamore and an Asian sycamore.
That's why.
Yeah, so, and it happens to be more, it grows better in polluted setting, where there's pollutants around and maybe not the greatest soil. The sycamore doesn't do as well in those kind of conditions. So if you see a tree that looks like that kind of bark on a city street or along a boulevard or in some neighborhood, it's probably a London plane tree. There are 2 of them planted in front of the Holliston Library. Yes. Did the garden club do that?
Yes.
Okay, yes.
Yeah, we have the London plane trees in front of the library, but
Right.
I believe the moon tree is an American sycamore, which is
I'm not
next to
sure.
the police station.
I'm not sure.
Isn't that an American sycamore?
It's a London, it is an American sycamore, yes.
It's not the plane tree.
No.
It's different. So right downtown on Washington Street, we have 2 plane trees and 1 American sycamore. If
Cool.
I'm correct, but I'm not
Cool.
positive about it.
Yeah, one of the other things that people say is that the way that the fruit grows. Usually, the London plane tree has two fruits growing in a cluster, and usually the American sycamore has just 1, but that's usually. There are exceptions, so you can't really use that. So like I said, where it's growing, I think is your best way. But it's a cool tree. All right, the hickories, another compound leaf, but not growing with opposite branching and leafing, but alternate. All the hickories have a leaf very much similar to that. The number of leaflets can vary a little bit, but they all look pretty much like that. I think this one, the mockernut hickory, has a few more leaflets. So these are the three that you're likely to see: pignut, mockernut, and shagbark. The shagbark is another one of those bark. Bark is your best bet. Yes.
That's actually on the golf course.
Oh, there's one in the golf. Cool. Yeah, so that one's pretty distinctive from the bark. It's got the, this peeling, very different, shaggy look to it, exactly, which is why it's called that. Very distinctive. The best way to tell the mockernut and the pignut apart are if you see them either a winter bud or their fruit. You can see how this is kind of fatter looking, it's a little more round, it's got deep grooves. This has, where it comes apart, it's actually sticking out as opposed to inverted, a little bit more oval shaped. This is a thinner twig and bud, and that one's stouter. But the stoutness of the twigs you could see even when it has leaves on. So those are the best ways to tell those apart. And the shagbark, the bark is very distinctive. This one, the scientific name, I put this up there because scientific name is tomentosa. If you see that and any kind of plant name, it means that it's some kind of hairy look to it, fuzzy, hairy look. And the back of the mockernut hickory leaves actually have that fuzzy look, so that's another way to tell them apart. So the last few that I'm going to talk about are smaller trees that typically grow in. You were talking about the canopy. There's the canopy is like the what goes over the tall trees that are over the forest. Then we have trees that are called understory trees that never reach the canopy. They tend to be they tend to stay at like maybe 30 feet max, but a lot of them are much smaller. And serviceberry is also called shadbush. There are 3 or 4 species of them that you can find in local nurseries. I found that I think this one here, the lavis, is probably, or lavis, I don't know how you, lavis, I don't know how to pronounce it, I'm sorry, is one of the more common ones that you'll find. And it's a small tree. It has these beautiful flowers here. Really, a lot of wildlife value to this. Produces some great fruit. Lovely fall color, and then just kind of delicate flowering. Yes?
We just planted 2 at the Green Street.
Oh, super.
They're in the middle, the second and the third tree that the 300 committee planted yesterday, actually.
Cool. Well, they are a great, sometimes they're shrubby, sometimes they're a small tree, a lot of times sort of multi-stem like this here. But they are a nice substitute for the horrible invasive Bradford pear, which I see everywhere now, and it's driving me up crazy. I took one out of my yard that was planted many, many years ago, last year, and I'm going to put one of these in as a substitute. Yes?
Now, that's what I would actually like to know about, because I'm hearing all about this horrible Bradford pear, and you're not supposed to have it, and it's got big thorns and things. But then I look at that and I don't know how would you know?
Well, serviceberry is, it's gonna have a much more delicate look to it. I mean, certainly they are available in the trade, but they're not planted as much. The Bradford pear was planted extensively, so, the Bradford pear also tends to have this kind of oval shape that is pretty distinctive, but the flowers are actually the flowers on the Bradford pear have sort of purplish tips to the stamens. So if you can look at the flower, because they are flowering right now, and it's got a purple tip, it's a Bradford pear. And they do get, can get thorny, but they're spreading all over the place, yes.
Don't they supposed to smell or something?
Oh, and I guess I've never noticed the
It makes me paranoid now.
I've never noticed the smell that much, but a lot of people think it has a really unpleasant smell, yeah. Yes.
My neighbor planted 12 Bradford pears on his property, and now they're big and they stink. They're terrible.
See, yeah. Well, you drive home, you're gonna see them everywhere, unfortunately. But in farther south, they're a real problem. They're spreading all over in natural areas and causing problems. Yes.
So I was reading somewhere that they're going to ban planting of, included the Bradford pear
So
in Massachusetts.
Massachusetts has an invasive plants list, and it's, it is vetted by, there are scientists, there are foresters, there are nurserymen. The group that makes these decisions, comes from all the different, and I think it's very on the tip of being included on that list. But when that happens, it's phased over a period of time, so stock that people already have, they can continue to sell. So, but eventually, hopefully. Anyway, I won't go on anymore about that. It's we live and learn, I guess. I planted that one in my yard 30 years ago. So, one of my favorites. Sassafras. What's really distinctive about sassafras is its leaves. It has 3 different kinds of leaves on the same tree. It has just this single little sort of canoe-shaped leaf. It has one that looks like a mitten. And then it has this one, which I just saw the other day. I love the description. Sort of looks like a dinosaur footprint. I've never had a good way to describe that other than 3 lobes, and I like that one. So yeah, very distinctive. It has beautiful fall color, and it's blooming right now. So if you see it on a road, you see some little sort of inconspicuous yellow flower cluster on a roadside or something, it might be the sassafras. It also has kind of, the new twigs are pretty green too. So anyway, that is, I think I mentioned at Waseca Wildlife Sanctuary, there is a pitch pine trail. There's also a sassafras trail, as it so happened. And if you look closely, you will find sassafras along that trail. And here's my final slide. I've gone on longer than I wanted to, but American witch hazel, another one of my really favorite trees. You will see a lot. This actually blooms in November and December, or starts in October, but not December is too late. October, November is what I meant to say. These are the flowers. There's little delicate things. They're so cute. It has kind of this, the leaf is fairly distinctive in that it has, or is somewhat distinctive. Elms also have this, but the base is asymmetrical. You can see how it goes up like that and then down. Kind of a wavy, they still call these teeth, but it's more, I look at it as being kind of more wavy. The flowers, as I said, are very distinctive, and they come, especially when the leaves fall off and the flowers are still there. It's really nice. They really pop out. And they're out at a time when there aren't too many things blooming, and little insects come along and pollinate them. But then they have this really interesting feature, is that they're pollinated in the fall, but the fertilization doesn't actually take place until the spring. So fertilization means that the pollen goes down to the ovule, the egg, and so that implantation is delayed until the springtime. It develops fruit over the summer, and this is what they might look like late in the summer, early fall. this is what they look, this is what they look like just after the, so that's what they look like right after the petals all fall off. Then there's the developing fruit in the next year, and then in the fall, they gradually dry, and then those have been open and the seeds have been expelled. They actually just suddenly, I've never visually seen this, but I've read about it all over the place, but they pop open and expel the seeds as much as 20 feet. So that's how they disperse their seeds. But they also have this really cool gall. Galls are these little growths on a plant. It could be on a leaf, it could be on a stem, any kind of growing part, usually caused by an insect laying its egg under the growing leaf, and it causes the leaf to form this, like it's trying to basically wall it off so it doesn't harm itself, but the insect larva develops in there and then comes out. And the one that's on the witch hazel is extremely distinctive shape. So my final thing about witch hazel is it's in bloom around Halloween. It's got a witch hat-shaped gall, and it's a lot. So the name seems appropriate, even though it's actually from something totally different. But I think I think that's my last slide. Let's see. Yep. So in terms of process, I think the best thing is to kind of, I hope I gave you a little bit of an idea, sort of dividing things into categories, evergreen and deciduous, needle-leaved versus scaly-leaved if they're evergreen. And if they're not, opposite and alternate, does it have teeth? Is the leaf compound? What's the shape? The shape of the edges of the leaf is often helpful, as well as the overall shape. I didn't go too much into buds here because that could just go on a lot. But if you learn buds and twigs and things like that, you can identify trees in the winter as well. So. Any other questions?
Thank you, Anne Marie. I think we learned a lot today.